Hey everyone, Stress here, and this is a new type of video I'm going to be doing on my YouTube channel. Basically, I'm going to be following a lot of events over the next year and that type of thing, and there's always community criticism about events, event production, and I think it's always good to kind of temper it a little bit with some of the logistics that go on behind the scenes when it comes to events. So going to be maybe doing a bit of a series on where the community is spot on and where there's a few other things that need to play into it. And today I want to talk a little bit about the Fortnite Pro Am that took place at E3 yesterday, specifically the camera work. There's been a lot of criticism of the camera work, the observers, the in-game camera that Fortnite brought and Epic Games used for yesterday's big Pro-Am show. So I guess I'm kind of experiencing this because I used to be an EU LCS observer, and I've worked with a lot of production teams. I've sat in the control room and kind of watched as a show is produced live. There's a lot of guesswork involved for me in this example because I can see two ways that they would actually have done the camera work, and both have a few individual unique different weaknesses and pros and cons, that type of thing. And I just wanted to walk through maybe a few things behind the scenes that maybe influence why the camera work wasn't as good as you might expect it to be. First things first, they've only just had spectator mode. So for a start, number one, this is their very first event. It's never going to be perfect. Nothing was going to be perfect. And certainly it went pretty smoothly, but there were a few hiccups along the way. So let's get into the two different ways that I can see that they would have done the camera work and how the observers were set up yesterday for the broadcast. So the easiest one, case one, is what we used to use in the LCS, where you have an observer team and they are responsible for the entirety of the direction of the in-game product. What that means is we had one lead observer. He was the one whose computer screen 90% of the time was what you were seeing live on broadcast. He is then getting information from other observers. At one point, I think we had 4 or 5 observers actually working in one team. And he's just constantly getting information in, figuring out where he has to go next on the map and figuring out what to look at. Now, if that is the case, those would be predominantly those wide scenes that we were seeing from the observing yesterday in the Pro-Am, where they were taking the nice wide angle, seeing a lot of the viewpoint of the game. Now, this is reliant heavily on communication between observers because live in the moment is very difficult. Now, the reason that I don't think they actually went for this is because of the way we saw players changing DPI settings on the mouse, changing some of their settings differently in-game as well. It actually leads me to believe that they were taking the player perspective cameras, which is a very different ballgame altogether. I'll get to that in just a second. Now, what using observers only does is gives you a very clean viewpoint of the game, gives you good angles, gives you the ability to kind of absorb a lot of that information as you're going on, because the whole point of a main observer is to make the game easy to view. The difficulty behind that is the fact that you'd have to have constantly people swapping to different player perspectives and then change to a different observer, which is possible. It's how we did replays in the LCS. You'd take a second screen that had the replay set up. The director in the control room would say, okay, we're going to the replay. Replay comes up on the screen. They swap it over, swap the audio, swap the video, and then swap back at the end of the replay. Very simple. It's how replays are done in esports typically, at least in League of Legends. That's what I can speak for. So, case two, what I think is more likely and which I think is way more technically challenging and almost insane to do with 100 PCs. I don't know technically how they did it. I'm going to assume they just took a video out from every single PC. That's my guess. This is where the guesswork comes in, because we saw people changing their mouse settings, their DPI. We saw the mouse cursor come on screen, which leads me to believe either there was a video out from every single PC or some kind of team viewer. I think the liability for a team viewer program would be pretty bad, although I have seen productions use it. I've seen productions go in and use team viewer and kind of take a video output of what a player is doing in the screen. Now, this is way more difficult for me. Not only do you have 100 PCs that could potentially go wrong. And even if you only took a selection, even if you only took 20, having 20 additional video outputs is an insane extra number. Not only do you have to have that, but I think this is where some of the problems came up with the camera work. A lot of people were frustrated that we weren't seeing a lot of the action, that during the action between some of the fights with Ninja, we had people swapping to some of the other remaining players. So in this situation where you take all of the video outputs and you have the observers, you have to have a very good director in place. And that's a director in the control room, not just talking about the games. Typically, in esports, whenever you see in-game, the director of the show isn't the one in control. Now, if you have all of these video outputs, the director needs to be in control of the show. And the reason is, when you're doing a stadium show, in the massive arenas, you need a competent director, producer, assistant director, and sometimes even technical director. You need people that can control a show in such a big environment. It's not just the in-game, it's those little picture-in-pictures that you see, the cameras that show up. You have, from what I counted, I don't have a count on their full cameras, but they had at least 3 roaming cameras, 3 static cameras from the casters, at least 2 jibs, and then backstage cameras. You need somebody who can control the organization and flow of how that show actually goes. And that's great. There's lots of directors now in esports that have come from a traditional sports background into esports, and they're doing very well. Most, I would guess, of the top productions in esports have a director that has a traditional sports background in some way, or at least traditional events. There's a key problem with that, though. If your director is now responsible for taking those computer outputs and deciding which one to go on the screen, you now need a director that understands the game as well as his craft to the highest level in esports. And that is very rare. Only recently, in the last year or two, are we even starting to get directors and production people in general that have that crossover between being esports fans, being gamers, and being production talent that have been trained up by some of the producers, directors that have a background in traditional events, traditional broadcast. At the EULs, yes, we had 20 cameras. 10 of them, sure, were static. They were the player cameras. But to have somebody that can control roughly 20 cameras and know exactly what shot to take and also do it with an artistic flair that looks good is very, very complicated. It takes years of training. It takes high pressure situations where a director knows exactly what shot to get, knows what not to shoot, knows how to direct the camera people. Sure, it is a team of people in the control room, but typically in esports, it's a very small team of people. So you need people that are high skilled, high understanding, and now you have this massive tech addition into the game, into the broadcast with potentially 100 video outs. It's my guess that's how they were doing it. I may very well be wrong. Someone from Epic and the production team, I would love to know how you're doing it. But if that is the case, suddenly the director has this ridiculous job where he has to control the entire show with almost no break. Now, what I think would be a solution to this would be you have a secondary director that in-game can direct, but then can't be an observer at the same time, because you need to have that overview of every single person and then the communication coming in and out. So it's a very complex process on how to decide what exactly is going out to stream. You get bottlenecks from communication. In a game like Fortnite, split second and you miss it, the entire engagement has gone down. It's not quite as easy to see the setup in it as in a game like League. So there's very, very quick, fast-paced action with a lot of space in between. So for me, simplest solution would be having a second director that's in charge. That may very well have been what they've done, but it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be things that you miss. Every esport has things that they miss. And it's just a really, really tricky environment. A production room in esports is an incredibly high pressure environment. Again, seconds are the difference, split seconds are the difference between catching the action that you want and not catching it. I mean, traditional sports directors have an incredibly difficult job as it is, and they've been doing it for so many years. So you come in and it's the first time we've ever broadcast Fortnite. Great, okay, we've got to direct, see exactly how it plays out. That's the production side of things. Mechanically observing a game is also harder than I think most people would anticipate. And I can speak from that in a sense of League of Legends, which is a top-down view. There's 10 people on the map and only 3 lanes really to look at. Maybe you have to go and look at the jungler every so often if something crazy is happening. And you get a mini-map at all times that shows the entire map, that shows everybody and where they're going to go. That's difficult enough as it is, because you have to be constantly deciding what is important to show. I cannot comprehend how difficult it is to observe 100 players, all of which are interesting. Like, there was no celebrity or streamer there that nobody wanted to watch. So suddenly you've got 100 points of view that people want to see, and you have to decide which one. Now, of course, you have the more interesting Fortnite personalities of Ninja and Myth, but if every tournament we have always observes Ninja and Myth, then nobody is going to get popular other than Ninja and Myth. And those two guys are incredibly popular on their own as it is now. Of course we want to see them. Of course we want to see them play. But I think a lot of players actually put up a pretty good performance. I'm glad we got to see some of the players from Vitality, some of the other esports teams being observed for a while. We kind of had that vibe as it was going on that I feel it's better to stick with one player. And I think this is something we're going to see throughout the development of esports. Is I want to see, maybe we go into a game and we say, okay, this game we're going to watch Ninja, this is the one we're doing. And then later on, every other game is you track a different player until they're either eliminated or win the game. It could be a little bit boring, but at least the ability to swap to different angles will give you the chance to kind of drop in on other things on the map. And that's where having multiple observers would actually be helpful. I mean, if you want observing at the absolute basic level, you just shove it on the gameplay camera and just have that go. And whoever you're with is great. We see what they see. We see what they do, how they do it. Everything's great. But that's going to become pretty boring and pretty static after a while. You want those high, wide angles that show you the overview, shows you the verticality of the game as well. It's going to get stale if it's just the single viewpoint. You need to have more from that. And I'm just going to be honest, I have tried spectating a game that I've never watched before in the replay client, which is the only thing we have available. It sucks spectating live. It is incredibly tough to spectate with that tool across 3 axes, because you got to go X, Y, and Z, because obviously the building goes into it. So to be able to very smoothly and easily kind of pan around and look for these different aspects of the game is really difficult. Like, I struggled. I thought I was doing great when I was doing it. Went back and rewatched it, and it just looked like an earthquake was happening all throughout the game. So it's very tough to mechanically do it. It's very tough to coordinate it and communicate it. When you look at how some esports are produced, the EULCS for the laning phase uses a 5-second delay. What that means is our primary observer is actually 5 seconds behind the live action, and every other observer knows what is coming with a 5-second window, and they can say, oh yeah, it's a kill in the bottom lane, first blood. So you know, with a few seconds spare, you gotta go down to the bottom lane, you can watch him first blood. But the way that Fortnite is actually played, there's such a reaction from the players on stage that you don't have the time to do that in the laning phase for League. The reason it's the laning phase is because typically nobody dies in the laning phase. There's a lot of build up to it. Whereas Fortnite, if 2 people drop in at the same time at the beginning of the game, that could very well be Ninja getting eliminated right off the bat if he drops next to somebody else. So you need to see that. You need to see it in real time. And if you don't see it, it's just kind of a disappointment for everybody. And that's where people were feeling pretty downtrodden about some of the pro-am camera work, but it is tough. And keep in mind, Epic have only really had this internally, I would imagine, for a few weeks, and they certainly have not had that setup with the 100 players, the 100 PCs, the PCs outside in the sun. That's a whole nother ball game. Deciding to put 100 PCs on the stage, is ridiculous as it is, but putting it out in 30-degree heat where the possibility of stuff overheating, and it just boggles my mind how they managed to do it without any real major impact happening. It's going to take a while for Epic to actually get the spectator. It's going to take a while for really good spectators to come through as well. I mean, the LCS only really started putting together a spectator handbook of how to do it 2 years, I think, into the LCS. Some of the NAA and EU observers actually started talking a little bit more and put together a guidebook. And there's always iterations. There's always improvements to be made. I mean, when the champion Rek'Sai was released, we were like, it'd be super cool to follow a Rek'Sai ult when she used to fly across the map. And you'd be like, great, we're going to try and figure out how to do that. It took like 2 weeks to figure out how to do that to a point where you could do it and replicate it on broadcast every single time. So maybe give the Epic observers a few weeks more with actual competition to be able to spectate in real time. And I think you'd be able to get there. But it's going to take a while. It wasn't perfect. The big TLDR of this video is it's not perfect, but honestly, having a functional spectator mode is a great step towards Fortnite esports. I say that with such a smile on my face because I've been waiting for this since we basically found out Fortnite was PvP and was going into the Battle Royale. I've wanted to cast it as an esport. You need that spectator client. It's finally here. Now all we need is it to go public and to have the custom game issue sorted out, because those are some of the final pieces of the puzzle. I'm really excited about the announcement about the Fortnite World Cup. I know there's a lot of discussion about solos, duos, and squads, and how squads isn't going to be the focused one. Maybe I'll do another video on that at some point. And maybe I'll do more content like this in the future. I kind of want to talk about that production aspect, because I think it's something that people don't necessarily get to see very often. There's very few companies that are actually peeling behind the curtain and showing people exactly what is going on with the production side of things. But that is it for today's video. I want to say that if you are one of the people that was frustrated at the camera work with the Pro-Am, you absolutely have the right to that opinion, and it is a valid opinion, but just know that it's an opinion that I think is going to go down quite quickly once we have a lot of events. Every esports has problems with observing at the beginning. Every broadcast struggles with it to start, and it just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of patience. Keep giving the feedback on what you want to see, because that's how observers are going to be able to learn what is best for the broadcast. I just wanted to kind of take that step further and say, hey, maybe this is why they had some of the problems and how they could potentially solve it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about the video. Hit the bell to turn on notifications for the odd occasion that I do end up posting videos. I'm going to try and post more, try and post some varied content, some varied stuff. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.